Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining. Welcome to the Leading Change webinar on behalf of the Institute of Leadership and Management to celebrate or commemorate their International Leadership Week. There's all sorts of webinars and workshops and seminars going on around the country and even around the world to celebrate their particular Leadership Week. I'm Campbell Macpherson. Today is going to be all about change, and I'll introduce myself in greater detail and tell you all about myself in a little while. But today is about leading change, and leading change is the most important leadership skill of them all. What I do is I specialize in change, and in particularly in change leadership, because not only is it the most important leadership skill of them all, but it's the most important part or component of successful change. And successful change is really difficult, as we all know, to come about. So what we're going to go through today are these things. I'm going to go through a few of the key themes that we'll repeat and underline throughout the next 40 minutes or so. So it'll be 40 minutes of me talking, and by all means put any questions as you go through in the chat, and the wonderful Amy will draw my attention to them if I miss out on your question. I'll then introduce myself and who the dickens am I, for those of you who don't know me. Then I'd like to hear from you about what you've learned about change in these last 3 years. So give some thought to that and get ready to put it into the chat. I'll then talk to you about the 5 key truths I've learned about change over the last 25 years. Then we get stuck into the essential ingredients of successful change, which will also include how we react to change, because all change is personal and emotional, and it's all about leadership. And so we'll finish with the fact that change is all about leadership and it's all about influence. So what does extraordinary change leadership actually look like? And we'll cover that as well. And the end, at about 22, probably quarter to, we'll go through some Q&A, and I want you to share your nuggets. And what I mean by that is to take a piece of paper and right on the top of it, put the word nuggets. Because in any meeting, in any workshop, if you just take away 1 or 2 key nuggets of insight that you can actually put into practice straight away, then it's been a really good use of your time. In fact, it's a good test of any meeting or workshop you go on. Have you taken any nuggets away with you? Hopefully there'll be a whole page after today, and not just from me, but also from the chat and the comments from all of you as we go through today. And feel free to comment on anything as you go through. Oh, there's a good one, Richard. You've kicked off. What's the key difference between change and innovation? I believe that innovation is step change. So there's 2 types of change. One is continuous improvement, and the other, I would say, is innovation. So in my mind, I put innovation in the step change. It's like evolution and revolution. That's how I define them. In fact, in the Leading with Influence program, I've just been running with a major fund manager, major organization. That's how we looked at continuous improvement and step change, and we need both. Anyway, yes, a recording of this webinar will be available afterwards. I will be putting it on LinkedIn, and you can also go to the videos page of my site where you will find it. If not later this afternoon, certainly tomorrow morning. Excuse me. So let's crack on. Here's some of the key themes that I want to talk through today, or that you'll hear today, and I want your opinion on. Firstly, is that successful change is all about leadership. Of the 3 books that I've written, you can see over my shoulder and on the first page, the one that won the Business Book of the Year was called The Change Catalyst. And when I was writing that, it wasn't until I finished writing it that I worked out it was a book about leadership, because successful change is all about leadership. 88% of change initiatives fail. The same percentage of business strategies, the same percentage of mergers and acquisitions, they all don't deliver what they set out to achieve. And it's not because of poor change management, it's because of inadequate change leadership. And we'll talk about the difference in that as we go through today. So successful change is all about leadership, and we are all leaders. No matter where we sit in an organization, we are a leader, and therefore a leader of change. And one of the big reasons for this is that leadership is not about hierarchy, it's about influence. So therefore we can all influence others to help them to do what we need to be done, and also to help them do what they need to be done as well. Leadership is all about influence, and we're all leaders. But leadership is also, change is all about leadership, but leadership is all about change, because if we're not leading change, what are we really doing? We're managing the status quo, and frankly, we're just watching it unravel. That's not leadership. Leadership is all about change, but so is life. So as we will talk about at the end, and it's really what the second book was about, The Power to Change, is that the ability to accept change, to embrace change, and to make it work for you is the key life skill of them all. It's about acceptance, and it's about embracing change. And as leaders of change, which we all are on this course, or on this call, sorry, as leaders of change, if our people, if the people we work for, if the people we work with, and the people that work for us aren't able to embrace change, then nothing is going to happen. So there's some of the key things. Let me now talk about who I am and introduce myself. This is the website. Please jot it down, changeandstrategy.com. This is my website, and there's so many bits and pieces, including a video of this within a day or so, that will be available from the website. I help leaders worldwide to build extraordinary leadership teams, and I also help them to create highly successful leaders of change. And as I like to say, starting with ourselves. Here are some of the programs and workshops that we run. It's about extraordinary leadership teams. It's about extraordinary leadership. The really hot one at the moment is Leading with Influence, which is a program that we're running in several organizations. And of course, the Leading Change, Delivering Change, and Embracing Change workshops and webinars that I've been running for many, many years for Henley Business School and for other organizations around the world. And some of the organizations of my experience are here that I have had experience in. Those of you who know me will know my careers my careers have been wide and varied. I've been an HR director. I've been a marketing director. I've been an e-commerce director. I've been strategy director of Zurich for the emerging markets division. And my careers actually started way back when I accidentally joined the Royal Australian Air Force straight from school. And I still have the dubious honor of being the worst pilot ever to make it through to jets in the Royal Australian Air Force. And in fact, my flying was so bad that landing was always a problem. And the reason for that is that I had to memorize the eye chart to keep flying. So back in the 1980s, all you needed to know was CL, ED, HB, TVO, and they let you take a jet up solo. Madness. Anyway, I finished that and ended up with a vast array of careers and all sorts of different disciplines. And change was the one thing that was common. It was the one common denominator. And in fact, 25 years ago, when I was at Anderson Consulting, that's when I first discovered that change was a discipline and not just something that happened. I also discovered that, unlike at Anderson Consulting back in those days, change is not about systems, change is not about processes, change is entirely about people. And as leaders of change, it's about helping people to want to change. So what I'd love to know from you, and put it in the chat while I talk to you about what some of the other delegates of other workshops have said. What have you learned about change these last 3 years? I mean, goodness me, have we been through a lot of change, and it's not slowing up any day soon, with the virus, with Ukraine, with the inflation. What have you learned about your ability to lead change, your ability to cope with change, and your ability to embrace change and help others to embrace change over the last 3 years? And as you're typing those into the chats, because it will be a really interesting collection that I'll share with you afterwards, let me share with you a few of the things that other delegates have actually said in answer to that question. And I think the first two are fantastic. On the first time we did this webinar, which is probably about 4 years ago now, one delegate said, you know what I've learned, Campbell, is that not all change is bad. And I thought, okay, that's good. And the next one said, that's funny, because what I've learned is that not all change is good. And they're both right. I almost thought, there we go, there's the webinar. But even good change is only net good. There are consequences to everything. No change is perfect. And you know, when you implement a new organization design and everyone focuses on the negatives of the structure, because no structure is perfect, what if we took a step back and said, no structure is perfect, and said that up front, and said, let's focus on the 80% of the change that is good, and let's work out together how to mitigate the 20% of the change that was actually taking us back. So even good change is net good. I think what we've also found is that we can change if we have the motivation to do so. So think back to 2020. It seems like such a long time ago now, doesn't it? Think back to 2020. We suddenly, every single one of us started to work from home instantly within about a week or so. If we'd have set out to do a change project to do that, we'd still be in the project initiation phase. It simply wouldn't have happened inside 18 months, and it happened inside a week. So we can change if we want to and if we need to. And change means opportunity. Karen, I love that. That's really good. Adaptation is fun, difficult, but this comes with change. That is so good. Learn resilience, be focused. Resilience is critical, and we will touch on that a little bit later. We can change quicker than we thought, but we can change only if we want to, if we really have the motivation to change. Sometimes we change if we have to as well, and we'll talk about that a little later. Successful change requires constant vigilance, and some people cope with change better than others. And actually, we cope with change better in certain circumstances than we do in other circumstances. And so we have to be aware of that, be aware that others may not be able to change as quickly as we are in this circumstance. And sometimes we will actually be the laggard as well. And building resilience, as you said, is key. Communication is critical. I agree. Change is done in steps, in small steps. There's some fantastic comments coming through the chat. In summary of all of that, here are the 5 key truths I've learned about change in the 25 years since I was at Anderson Consulting. They may look like blinding glimpses of the obvious when you first look at them, but they're not. Let's have a look at them. Number 1 is that change is inevitable. A bit of a BGO. No, it isn't. Because once you actually appreciate or accept the inevitability of change, that it's not a project, that it doesn't have a start date or an end date, that it's continuous, then you can actually start to accept it and embrace it and work out how, looking for the positives of what I can do with that change. How I can make that change work for me, for my people, and for the organization. Because all change is personal. Oh, I love that, Paul. Everything is about change. I completely agree with that one, as someone else did too, with a laughy face. Anyway, with a laughy major. All change is personal because we all erect our own personal barriers to change. Do you just think about it? You have a default personal barrier to change. So do I, and they will happen instantly. Some of our barriers we're able to get over it or disregard or crumble in about 30 seconds, and others will take a lifetime. It depends on where you are in the change curve, as we will talk about. Possibly one of the biggest things that I've learned in writing these books is that all change is emotional. Every single change is emotional. In fact, logic is only 20% of the case for change. If we are logically agreeing with the case for the change and the need for change, we're only 20% there. If we're to engage in the change properly, if we were to help people engage in the change properly, then the 80% of us to really engage with the change is all emotional. And if you think about that, you know that to be true. All change is emotional. So as change leaders, we have to look to what are the emotional barriers that our people are going through, but also how we can excite them and get them on board emotionally, appealing to their ego, their status, their insecurity, and understanding where they are emotionally, because that's what we have to deal with or embrace so that they can embrace change as well. But the 5th one is so true. We only change if we want to. and that is so ridiculously true. We only change we want to. We humans don't change because we're told to. We only change if we want to. So as leaders, and we're all leaders of change here, leadership is about helping people to want to change. Right, Paul, you win. 2:15 in New Zealand. That's it. Sorry, Bella, you've been trumped by Paul. 2:15 a.m. Welcome. Good morning. So leadership is about helping people to want to change, and I think that is critical. And to me, that is the summary of leadership. but also we can be our own leaders. We can be our own leaders of change. But change is tough. As I said before, 88% of change initiatives actually fail, which as soon as I saw that from Bain & Co. back in, what was it, 2016, I knew I had the hook for the first book, because the first 10 chapters are why change fails. And the second 10 chapters are, well, what are we going to do about it? So why do change fails? And you all know quite a few of these. It changes because of lack of direction of purchase. It fails because of the communication, as you said, is not up. It fails because of ego and politics from complacency. But mostly it fails because we humans don't like change. So I would have, and the whole reason really comes down to leadership, because leading change is tough. Even Machiavelli said that it's one of the most difficult things you can possibly do as a leader is to lead successful change. But that's what we are all able to do, because we're going to go through now the essential ingredients of successful change. So get your nugget pages ready and let's go through some of them. Number one, top of the pops here of the essential ingredients of sustainable change is clarity. And it's clarity of not only what we're trying to achieve, but also why. So we need the what, we need the numbers and the narrative. Those of you in financial services, numbers are easy. We're going to double the size of the business. We're going to triple profits. We're going to increase AUM by 25%. All that's great, and it's sort of easy, but also the narrative. What sort of business, what sort of department, what sort of team, what sort of outcome are we actually trying to achieve? And just as importantly, because we humans don't change unless we want to, we need to know why. So clarity of what? Clarity of strategy. And you can download my overview of the Essential Guide to Strategy from the website. And it starts with what are we trying to achieve and why do we exist? We also need clarity of magic. What is the magic of the current state that we don't want to throw away? We don't want to throw the baby with the bathwater. So what is the magic of the way we currently work that we want to retain? What are those sacred cows? What are those things that we don't question? And what are the elephants in the room? Those questions we dare not answer. We need all of that clarified, bring them up the table. That's the clarity of the what. And that means we need to focus on outcomes. Do you know what? Process is really important. Process is really important, but it's a roadmap. First, we need to know what is the outcome we need to achieve, because a roadmap without a destination is simply a map to nowhere. And then we need clarity of why. So why do we need to change? There's a right reason and a real reason for this. Now, the right reason will be logical. We're going to be part of this business that's going to double the size of the business, or we're going to take 10% out of the cost of the business, whatever the logical reason is. And that's a logical reason that I need to change. The 20% of my head, the 80% of my heart wants to know the real reason, which is really what's in it for me, in a sense. What is the emotional reason why I need to change? And as leaders of change, we have to appeal to every single one of our people's emotions. And as a corporate leader, we need to understand the emotions and the drivers of our people so that we can appeal to those emotions. They want to know why they need to change. Number two on the list is ensure implications are fully understood. This might be number three. I think we've done two already. Anyway, ensure implications are fully understood. I did a piece of work with a major financial services platform a little while ago, and the CEO stood up and gave the version of the strategy, and he literally said, we're going to double the size of the business, triple the profit, and isn't that going to be fabulous? Jobs for all. Yeah, what do I do? That's good, Paul. I agree with that entirely. And in fact, in my strategy and the strategic core, I've even talked about why do we exist? What is it that we do that's differently, and so what are the benefits to all of the stakeholders? Anyway, back to this. Ensure implications are fully understood. So the CEO stood up and gave his version of the strategy and said, this is what we're trying to achieve. Then I stood up and I had behind me a board that said, a slide that simply said, what could possibly go wrong? And everyone tittered. And I said, seriously, as the CEO was talking about the strategy, all that's going through your head are all the reasons why it's going to be difficult. All the things that could go wrong, all the obstacles that he hasn't thought about. So let's get all of them out on the table. And this is normal. We need to do this in every change initiative, in every business strategy we try and implement. So we got all of the negatives and the obstacles and the fears and the challenges out on the table. Everyone was a bit nervous to start with, and then it was a bit of a flurry. It was like a flood. Then we prioritized them, and then we of all 100 managers, they separated into tables of 10, and we worked on how are we going to overcome them. So literally by the end of the day, we had all of the key objectives objections out on the table, and we had ways that they were actually going to work to overcome them. So not only everyone was on board with the change, with the strategy, but it was their change in strategy because they saw how it could actually be, how they were actually going to implement it. And as I said before, even good change is net good. So don't let the pursuit of perfection get in the way of good. If it's 80% good, let's celebrate the 80% and then work to maybe mop up some of the 20%. But let's focus on the big part of the pie. And we don't do that. We don't do that enough. And even if your people aren't actually saying that they're thinking the 20% negatives will be much larger in their head than it should be. So get all of those negatives out on the table. And that is the key part of genuine communications and engagement. It's all about listening. Now, as Stephen Covey said, and I love this, is the biggest communication problem is we don't listen to understand, we listen to reply. And how many times have I been in a meeting or even a one-to-one, and all we're doing is we're being quiet and waiting for a gap so we can jump in with our opinion? We're not listening. We're not listening to understand where the other person is coming from. We're not listening to we don't even care. We just want our opinion out there. But if we listen and then play back what they're actually saying, that's active listening. And that is what all change leaders need to do to really get under the skin of how to get people engaged with the change. And even better, we learn stuff as we do that. We learn what about the change needs to change. So what about the strategy needs to change? And if we listen, we engage with people and they're on board now, and we can actually deliver this change together. Because remember, emotions trump logic every single time. There was a Portuguese neuroscientist called Professor Del Marcio, who did a piece of research on people that had damaged part of their brain, either by accident or at birth. And it was the part of the brain that dealt with emotions. And in fact, it was almost like switched off, so that they were like Spock. They could only think logically. Emotions played a very small part in their lives. And what he also found is they couldn't make decisions, because we need emotions to make decisions. We are dealing with humans. We're creatures of emotion. Even in financial services, I spent a lot of my time in where we get very high IQ and sometimes not as high EQ people. And we all believe we're making decisions based on logic, and we're not. We're based not only logic. Logic underpins the decision, but it's emotion that really convinces us that that is the right decision to make. We have confidence in a fund manager. We have commitment to a certain direction, and that is about emotion. And that's how we react to change. This is something I put together for Henley, or first did at Henley. I call it the change matrix. It's not a particularly creative name for it, but it plots the size of the change versus the degree of personal control, and it's the x-axis where the magic happens. The degree of personal control that we have over the change. And in every single one of those squares, we experience a roller coaster of emotion. I'm only going to be talking about the top two, because that's where big change happens. The burning platform quadrant, where big change is forced upon me, and the quantum leap quadrant, which is big change that I have chosen. And when we're in either of those quadrants, we undergo a roller coaster of emotion. Let me talk to you about the burning platform quadrant. I want you to wear two hats here. I want you to wear a personal hat of big change that you've gone through, and a leader's hat of how you can help your people navigate this change curve. So many will have seen a version of this before, and therefore, by all means, put some comments in the chat of what you feel when you've used this or experienced this before. What's your big outputs or nuggets or takeaway? It is a modified version of a curve that Kubler-Ross, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a psychiatrist from back in the 1970s. She was Swiss back then, I think, moved to the States. She wrote a book called On Death and Dying, and this was her grief curve. And it was what she found is that the emotional roller coaster that her patients went on were predictable and uniform, and also matched by their loved ones. Now, this is a version that is more relevant to the world of corporate change, but it's still highly relevant. When big change is done to us, and you can think personal, like divorce or a death of a loved one, obviously, or maybe a big change at work, a change of role that you don't see as positive, or maybe even being made redundant. The first thing that we experience as humans when big change is done to us is shock. After that comes denial. This can't possibly be happening. When the leaders wake up to themselves, that they'll change it. They'll go back to the old structure. When they don't, we get angry. And that anger comes in many, many forms, but it masks several fears. And those fears could be a fear of obviously a fear of the future, a fear of financial, a fear of loss of status, a fear of being blamed for not changing earlier. There's so many different fears that we talk about in The Power to Change. And then we slide down into what I lovingly call the trough of depression. Sometimes that can be big D depression, but other times it can just simply be listlessness and a feeling of I'm not in control here and completely out of control. Let's just call it the trough. That is normal. I've been in the trough before several times in my long list of careers, and I'm sure most of you have as well. All of your people will be in the trough when you instigate big change that they weren't expecting. Eventually, our heads can understand that this change is happening, and maybe there's some opportunity here. Our hearts then will accept the change and accept that there are opportunities, and we can actually move on. But we don't move on to nirvana or sunny uplands. What we move on is to another change curve down the track, because this change curve is always with us. Whenever big change happens to us, we will go through the change. So the biggest message here is twofold, actually. One is accept the curve, and the second one is help people through it. So when your people are getting angry because when big change happens, they're not angry at you. It's a normal human reaction to big change that's done to us. And the trough is where victims dwell. We really need to help people and help ourselves when we find ourselves out getting in the trough, to help ourselves to get out of it. We all know people who have ended up dwelling in the trough for so long that the victimhood becomes their persona. They end up becoming victims, and it becomes they own it. They become victims for life, some people. What we need to do is help them to get out of the trough. And while we can ride to their rescue and put our arms around them and give them a cup of tea and say, this isn't fair, you didn't deserve this, I know you didn't deserve this, and they're being really nasty, whoever's persecuting you, what we then need to do is to help them to say or ask the question, so what are you going to do about it? And that's a lot easier said than done, but it's the only way at the right time that we can help ourselves and help others to get out of that trough. But there's another change curve that no one tells you about. This happens when big change is instigated by ourselves. Let's say we've gone for a new job and we get it. We start with excitement. Another example is having a baby as well, or getting married. We start with excitement and then we go, oh my gosh, what have I done? And then fear is like, what have I done? Maybe I'm going to be rubbish at this new job. This is how am I going to cope with a new baby? It doesn't come with an instruction book at all. And then there's buyer's remorse or seller's remorse. Oh my gosh, what have I done? And it's our own little form of trough. When I was going through this with one of my insurance clients, the CEO, who had been there about 12 months, she started to grin. And in front of all of her top team, she stood up and said, everyone, I'd just like you to know I've finally made it through to genuine belief. but that was only last week. And everyone was shocked, A, at her honesty, which was wonderful, and her vulnerability. Suddenly she had a really tight team after this, but also the fact that everyone goes through this own version of the curve when they instigate big change. So when you promote someone, support them. Give them the support they need to succeed. And that's another secret to success. Set your people up to succeed. What they need to succeed is self-awareness, self-belief. They need clarity from you. They need development, and they need support. But you know what? So do you. So set yourself up to succeed. And what is it that you need to succeed? At a generic level, you need the same thing: self-awareness, self-belief, clarity, development, support. What do you need to succeed in whatever it is you're about to set out to do? And set yourself up to succeed, and set your people up to succeed. So we've talked about how we react to change. Now let's talk about when people react to change. This is a wonderful model that I highly recommend. It's from a neuroscientist called David Rock out of Brisbane. And probably about 15 years ago, I think he came up with this. He calls it the scarf model for obvious reasons. And the beauty of it is this, that when change happens, if someone perceives a loss of status, of personal status, and it's perceives, they'll be against the change. If they see a positive growth in status or improvement in status, they'll be for the change. Same thing with certainty, same thing with autonomy, same thing with their relationships, and same thing with fairness, if I think I'm being treated fairly or unfairly. So what I highly recommend is, if you find someone that is reticent to a change, that you know they put their change barriers up, think about what they could possibly be afraid of. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. We all have fears, as we saw on the curves, but also run through this and say, do they perceive a loss of status? They might. Okay, then what can I do to help them to improve this? Do they perceive a loss of certainty? Am I taking autonomy away from them? And then the other way is how to get people on board is big up their status. Make the plan certain. Give them some autonomy over certain bits and pieces. Make sure the relationships are still, in other words, give them support, and make sure everyone is being treated fairly. Another secret to success here is to remove the ego and the politics. Every single one of us have been on a big change project, like an IT project, whereas it ends up like a locomotive racing down the track, and it's politically impossible to jump out in front of that train and say, stop, why are we headed in this direction? Are the outcomes still valid? And should we just pause and take the ego, take the politics out of this, and say, are we still headed in the right direction, or have things changed? Has circumstances changed that we should change direction? That is so hard to do, and as leaders of change, you must do it. And the other thing is to avoid complacency, of course. I used to say the complacency was the disease that only infects the successful, but actually it affects lots of organizations who have been doing the similar thing for a long time. And it's really, really hard to realize that your competitor has made a step change and you need to be following suit. So be careful and beware of complacency. And probably the biggest thing, and we're getting close to the end of the top 10, is create a change-ready culture. Because if your people aren't ready, willing, and able to embrace change, nothing's going to happen. They need to understand the change curves. They need to be able to cope with their fears. They need to voice their concerns, all in a very safe environment. Did you know that Google did a piece of research of their own teams and found the highest performing teams in Google were the ones that felt that they were psychologically safe? In other words, it was safe to try something, to fail. It's a horrible term. In fact, Ritz-Carlton don't even use it. They're not allowed to use the word fail. You have to use the word glitch. So they tried something, it didn't succeed. They learned from it and move on. Whereas a psychologically unsafe team is one where you fail and everyone remembers it and you'll learn nothing and everyone hunkers down. What are you creating? What sort of culture are you creating in your team, in your department, in your business? Are your people encouraged to question the status quo? And are they open to new ways of working and looking to improve the way that they work as well? Are they encouraged to learn from glitches, as Ritz-Carlton would have said? And the last two lines here is their behavior aligned to deliver the strategy you all need to deliver? And more importantly, is yours? Because we all need to be able to accept uncertainty, and that's what embracing change is, and leading change is all about helping people to accept that uncertainty. And I'm going to give you a couple of tips that I use in my workshops, and that we talk about this in great detail, and people get up with Post-it notes. We all know, or we probably know, the this particular poem, and I've even forgot the name, the Serenity Prayer, that's it, from Reinhold Niebuhr. It's grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. There's, in the middle here, is the stuff we can control. It's often not that big an area, but there's certain things we can influence, and there's certain things we can only observe. Now, what I do in the workshops that really works well, and I urge you to take this and use it in your teams, we put up 3 flip charts. And at the heading of one, we say, what are the things we cannot change? And on the second one, we say, what are the things you can change on your own? And then what are the things we can all change together? It's great to do this in teams. What it does is it takes the energy away from wasting time on the stuff we can't control, on the stuff we can't change. One of my clients, one of the things that they cannot change was their HR system. And to be perfectly honest, they was replacing so many HR people with a system that frankly didn't work. You can't replace people with a system, particularly in HR. It's madness. So I won't tell you who it was because you're going to short this talk. But this is what was happening. And every single meeting started with complaints about the system, and this is wrong, and what can we do about it, and this is wrong. So much so that I took the first Post-it note and said, your silly HR system, and that's literally what I wrote on the Post-it note, put that on the first flip chart and said, that's the first thing we can't change. Now, go. And everyone got up and put their own Post-it notes. Some were personal, some were as a team, and some was company-wide. But we had 3 flip charts full of Post-it notes of the stuff we can't change, the stuff we could change on our own, and those things we can actually change together. And what you do with those lists is you ignore the things you can't change. You stop, not ignore, but you stop pouring your energies in there. Someone said you simply screw it up in the ball and throw it away. No, it's always good to remind yourself, is going, you know what, we can't change that. So why don't we focus on these 2? And suddenly we had 2 wonderful to-do lists. Those things we can change on our own, and those things that together, if we work together, we can change as well. Scott, you got a really good question. Psychological safety, the same thing as mutual trust? I think they're very closely related. The short answer would be yes, as long as trust. I think psychological safety might be one step further, in that mutual trust can be proven if someone makes a mistake, owns up to it, and then works, and the group works out what we're going to do to overcome that, and then moves on. So it's not trust to never make a mistake, it's trust to learn from glitches and to own up when you've made a mistake. So they're related, but I think psychological safety is probably one step further on. But I'd love to know everyone else's views as well. Put that in the chat. So accepting reality is really important. So they're the essential ingredients of successful change, the chapters 11 to 20 of the change catalyst, to be perfectly honest, with a couple of others thrown in for good measure. I also recommend you all be a catalyst for change, and that is focus on the outcomes, get someone to focus on the process, and together you can deliver some amazing things if you realize that all change is personal, all change is emotional, and change needs to be done together as a team, because this all boils down to leadership. It's not about change management. To me, change management is people walking around with clipboards. That process is really important, and I need change managers whenever I'm looking after a big change initiative. But change leadership is the thing that will make or break the change initiative the business strategy, the merger, the acquisition. I would like you to write down, what do you think the most common traits of extraordinary leaders of change are? And here's 14 that have come out of my workshops. If we were running this as a workshop, we would actually break into groups. If we had the time here, we'd break into groups and I'd ask you, how does a poor leader make you feel? And some of the answers we've got back. And you think of it. You think of poor leaders and how do they make you feel? They make you feel small. They make you feel irrelevant. They make you feel like you don't want to come into work anymore. They make you doubt yourself. And what does an extraordinary leader do? And extraordinary leaders are extraordinary leaders of change. And here's the top 14 that have come out of 3-4 years of doing these workshops. Extraordinary leaders deliver results. It's really strange, but people don't seem to mention that. Extraordinary leaders care. Extraordinary leaders are trusted. They possess integrity. I'm sure there's an XPM in my mind when I'm talking about a lack of integrity, but the extraordinary leaders possess integrity. They're clear about what they're trying to achieve. They're empathetic. They empower people, and I love this. This is really crucial. They create more leaders, not more followers. And that's a boldness. As Jacinda Ardern said, that there's a strength in humility. And that's what extraordinary leaders are as well. Number 9 is something that, please take this away and write this down on your nugget paper. They embrace stewardship. They create a legacy. And I'd like you to ask yourself, what is your legacy? What are you going to leave behind? Because stewardship is about leaving your team in a better state than when you found it. Very few companies embed this into their culture. I highly recommend you embed it into yours. Leaving your team in a better state than when you found it, leaving your department in a better state than when you found it, leaving your business in a better state than when you found it. And extraordinary leaders are humble enough to do that. They enable people to shine. They empower them. They create more leaders because they want their legacy to be a better organization, better people, and creating leaders of leaders below them. They change their minds, they share their credit, they're authentic, and they build extraordinary leadership teams, because leadership today is a team sport. It's not just a solo pursuit. Emotionally, and all of that adds up to emotionally intelligent leadership. So one thing you'll do when you have a look at this video back again will be, where are you on this checkerboard of leadership? This comes from our Leading with Influence program that we run. Are you an extraordinary leader or en route to be an extraordinary leader, or are you a chaos creator most of the time? Or maybe you're on the cusp. But extraordinary leaders deliver results through their people. And that's what extraordinary leaders are all about. So it's all about change. And I always end with this slide. It's not the strongest of the species that survive, my friends, nor the most intelligent, thank goodness for that. But it's the ones that are most responsive to change. And that goes for people, that goes for leaders, and it goes for organizations as well. Thank you so much. That's the end of the of a run through of what can be a 6-day course, a half-day course, a 2-hour course, or as you said, a 45-minute discussion. I'd love to have your chats. By all means, put your this could be chaos, but let's do it anyway. Put your microphones on, put your cameras on. What questions have you got? And I'd like to share what stood out from you today. I'm more than happy to make the slides available, Paula. I can have that on the download section of my website, so I can put that on later today. It'll be in PDF form, no problem with that whatsoever. So, sharing some of your nuggets or a question that you may have over something that I said. There's so much in what I raced through, but something that I said that you might agree with, you want to underline, or you actually might know, Campbell, I disagree with that. What I've found in successful change is X. Paul, clarity seems to be particularly important. I do agree. Who'd like to ask a question? I've got a question for you, Lisa. Is how different is this than it was 3 years ago?
Can I have a go?
Sure, Sakina.
Thank you so much for the talk. First of all, it was really enlightening and really very helpful. My question is, I mean, I have an idea of the response in my head, but it's good to get insight on it.
Yes.
So one of my employers that I used to work for felt that big scale change could only be brought about by changes in employees. So mass scale redundancies, big organizational restructures, and that, from my perspective, caused more chaos than what needed to happen.
I think there'll be a lot of nodding heads behind the camera and blocks at the moment. Yeah.
So it's often felt that you just need to wipe it off and have a clean slate. What's your perspective? I guess is a big question.
Well, there's a couple of things there, and Joseph, we'll get back to your point in a second. If I don't, then put your camera on and ask it. Yeah, there's a couple of points there. Any big change, I saw this a lot at Anderson Consulting, in that they would be going in with the big system and process change, and they thought change was logical, and they thought that it could be done by spreadsheets and done by org charts. And it was really to tick the box of what's the employment law say we have to do, rather than actually go out with, here's the outcome we want to achieve. Now, can we really fully understand what the implications or the consequences of the change and actually engage people in doing that? Most changes, if they only do with process and they only treat people like human resources, are not going to deliver the outcomes they set out to achieve. Now, unless the outcome is we don't care what sort of culture or productivity we have, all we want is 10% fewer people, frankly. And we've all been in organizations that have taken that approach, and weirdly they've ended up with a culture that is rubbish. It's full of people that are worried that they're going to be next, or guilty that they haven't left, and the productivity goes through the floor, and the future, it's really hard to come back from that. So I've half answered your question with how it should be done, and it's not. It's treating. It's actually listening. It's understanding what the implications and consequences of the change are. That takes a long time, though. It takes effort. So hopefully we have the time to do that. If not, we simply have to mop up afterwards, knowing all of the mistakes we've made, and that's the next best thing. Paul, I'll get to yours in a second. There was one before. Yeah, Joseph, how do you convince your boss 80% is good, not 20% bad? It depends on the change you're thinking about, Joseph. You've got something in mind that you want to share?
Not really, just in general.
Okay. Let me give an example on organization design. Any organization design that doesn't say, here are the options we have for the structure, and here are the pros and cons of each structure, is going to fail. And the reason is that there is no such thing as a perfect structure. There's no such thing as a perfect change. So in order to lay out that there are pros and cons of each of the options, we've chosen option 2 in full knowledge, in full agreement with everyone that these are the cons. Now, how do we get around mitigating what those cons are? That's one example. The other is just is constant communication and listening and prioritization. If your boss is clear on what the priorities are, and that the 80% of the change hits those priorities, and then the 20% will be, okay, no change is perfect. What can we do to mitigate those? And you'll be focusing in the right way, knowing that that 80% is high priorities in the bag. Would be my 2 cents worth.
Okay, thanks.
Now, Paula, the acute, hang on, I've just got the back end of that. Paula, this is really good. I took over a new team and management was requesting I make some changes. And new ways of working, even though it's good for the team and the operation of the trust, went horribly wrong. What are your thoughts on implementation of these projects? Accused me of bullying and starting an investigation. Gosh, I think that sounds like a one-to-one session to work out what's going on there. If I can control my thing, took over team management. Paul, would you like to just come on and say, I can't actually, for some reason, my mouse is not allowing me no, here I can see it properly. I'll make some changes and new ways of working, even though it was good for the team. The question would be, how did you engage with the team? How do you engage with all the key stakeholders? One of the things we do in the big change management or change leadership, sorry, that was funny, slip of the tongue, workshops, is we go through the stakeholder assessment and stakeholder engagement framework. So to work out who is critical for the success of this project, and whether they are saboteurs or where they sit, or whether they're advocates and where they sit, and who's really influential and who's not. I think that would be extremely helpful. Hey, Fee, lovely to see you. But I think that would have been a really helpful exercise to go through. It still would be now to sit back and go, okay, let's do a post analysis. What went wrong? Why is this being accused of bullying? What's going on? So I would sit down and ask some questions and humbly go, tell me what do you think went wrong with this? What is it? Let's clarify what we're trying to achieve and get it back on the let's focus on the outcomes part of that. What policy related change, especially something that's a very wide scope? Sorry, Paul. Here's one. How have we helped leaders to manage their often unrealistic expectations, how quickly change will be delivered? How much can current change organizations cope with? That is a brilliant question and a brilliant point. It's working with senior leadership teams that is the most challenging, but also it's critical to be able to help them to understand that people can only, they get saturated with change. We can't be operating on 120% change all the time. We simply have to go through those curves, and we have to give people time. So it's actually helping them to realize that the change curve is a real thing and that they're forcing people through those curves, to be perfectly honest. It would be a really good step in the right direction. And possibly putting them through a leading with influence or emotionally intelligent leadership program, so that they really understand that leadership is not about spreadsheets and setting impossible deadlines. It's about engaging people to deliver the thanks, Andy, engaging them to deliver the change or the strategy that is needed. So Bella, what was that you're saying? We're driving change across countries and APAC, meetings and further meetings, they need to accept the change. Yes, it's actually listening in those meetings. Tell me about those meetings across APAC.
Yeah, we are a lot of countries with a lot of languages, a lot of cultures. So we wanted to operate in a globally consistent process from the client and we ourselves in CBRE. And we was trying to teach them, train them, and it went on for almost 6-8 months. It's great to know that it is at least more emotional than logical. So maybe I may have to work with that perspective, that they have to accept the change. They have to compare with the present systems maybe and what could be achieved. And
it's in order to they could do that logically, but they need to do that emotionally, as you said. So it's actually helping them to realize that everyone puts up barriers to change, that everyone has emotional barriers to change, and to help them to realize, even if they don't want to say it out loud, what their barrier to change actually is, and to help them to get on board or to overcome their own barrier to change. But as Absolutely. The change leader, it's very much to listen to, what do you think, get them on board to say, what do you think are the obstacles and challenges to achieving the outcomes that we need to achieve? Firstly, agree the outcomes, like this is what we need to achieve. Do you agree that'd be a good thing? Yes, right. Help me to work out how. And part of that how is you tell me, what are the barriers, what are the key challenges? Because when we did that back at that other organization, the high level barriers, they just evaporated and everyone got quite excited because they've been listened to. It's a really important
thank you. Great.
Really important point. So everyone, thank you so much. What I just want to say at the last bit is, please, to find out more, get in contact, go to the website, There are so many videos. There are me drawing the change curve. There's the Hungarian launch of the second book. It's in English. That's fine. There's several the webinars and speeches from all around the world that have been. It's been emotional to say the least. To be able to look through. There's lots of papers you can download as well if you want to do organization design. There's a really good guide to that, good guide to strategy, and of course the whole leading change and delivering change programs. Really interesting one on extraordinary leadership that I think you would really get a lot out of as well. Please sign up for the newsletter. Go to the newsletter/blog part of the page and subscribe, and of course have a check out the programs and workshops. But thank you so much for coming along today. It has been, I've really enjoyed it. All of the slides will be available from the website, as will the video in due course, hopefully just in the next couple of days. Good luck, everyone, and I hope your changes are successful. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.